According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word ambiguity is itself ambiguous. In everyday conversation, we use the term to describe a general state of uncertainty or dubiousness, but in formal semantics, the definition is strictly mechanical. Ambiguity describes a specific linguistic sign that bears multiple legitimate structural or lexical interpretations. This distinction matters immensely to philosophers, logicians, and engineers building natural language processing models. In common parlance, we frequently label a statement as ambiguous when it is merely underspecified or lacking detail. To study language scientifically, we must address the problem of demarcation. We have to draw a hard boundary between true structural fractures in language and words that are simply fuzzy or broad in their application. True ambiguity is not a failure of speaker clarity or listener knowledge. It is a specific, mechanical property of how language generates meaning, one that requires precise formal tools to accurately diagnose. To locate true ambiguity, we first have to eliminate what it is not. The first non-ambiguous category is vagueness. Vagueness is simply a lack of precision or the presence of fuzzy boundaries within a definition. Vagueness creates borderline cases, like attempting to identify the exact grain of sand that turns a pile into a heap. The word heap does not produce multiple discrete meanings. Its boundaries are simply inexact. The second category to eliminate is context sensitivity. This occurs when a term shifts its physical reference without changing its underlying linguistic convention. The index equal pronoun I is the classic example. The semantic meaning of I is unified and constant. It always refers to the speaker, even though the actual physical human it points to changes with every new utterance. The third category is sense generality, or underspecification. A word can have a single unified meaning that simply lacks specific granular detail. Take the word aunt. The word maintains one unified definition, the sister of a parent. It does not split into two different definitions simply because it fails to specify whether the relative is maternal or paternal. Vagueness, context sensitivity, and generality do not split a word into discrete definitions. Therefore, to find true ambiguity, we must look for a fundamental structural or lexical fracture within the cognitive pipeline of language. When language fractures into multiplicity, it originates in one of two primary cognitive layers: the lexicon or logical form. Lexical ambiguity occurs at the level of our mental dictionary. It happens when discrete entries in the cognitive lexicon share the exact same written or spoken forms, but possess entirely distinct meanings. For example, the word duck functions independently as both a noun for a bird and a verb for an evasive action. Similarly, bank can refer to a financial institution or the edge of a river. They sound identical, but they are entirely different linguistic tools. Syntactic ambiguity occurs one layer up during sentence construction. This happens when a single identical written sentence maps to multiple distinct structural trees at the level of logical form, the stage where syntax is prepared for semantic interpretation. Groucho Marx famously exploited syntactic ambiguity with the joke, "I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got into my pajamas, I'll never know." This syntax tree demonstrates phrasal attachment in superfluous hair remover. If brackets group hair remover together, the device itself is unnecessary. But if brackets group superfluous hair together, the hair being removed is unnecessary. The written sentence remains visually identical on the page. It is the underlying cognitive architecture that forces the listener to choose between entirely different truth conditions. Logicians study an even more complex form of syntactic ambiguity known as operator and quantifier scope. Quantifier scope dictates which logical variables in a sentence hold mathematical priority over others. Consider this classic case study in linguistics. Every woman squeezed a man. This equation displays formula A. The universal quantifier takes wide scope. For every woman, there exists at least one man she squeezed. In formula B, the existential quantifier takes wide scope. One specific, unlucky man is squeezed by every woman. Without resolving quantifier scope at the level of logical form, a single natural language sentence describes two vastly different physical states of the world. This structural volatility is exactly why computational linguistics and philosophical analysis require rigorous precision. So, how do we formally prove a term is ambiguous? rather than relying on gut intuition to tell us it is underspecified or vague. Linguists Arnold Zwicky and Gerald Sadek developed diagnostic tools for this exact problem, the most prominent being the conjunction reduction test. The mechanics of the test are straightforward. You must force a suspected ambiguous term to govern two radically different contexts simultaneously within the exact same sentence. Let's test the word light. Depending on the context, light can mean not dark, or it can mean not heavy. We start with two separate, non-ambiguous baseline inputs. The colors are light, and the feathers are light. We combine the inputs into a single reduced string. The colors and the feathers are light. The result is zeugma, the jarring, absurd meaning clash that occurs when discrete, non-overlapping lexical entries are forced into a single syntactic node. The test is not invincible. It has vulnerabilities, particularly when dealing with privative opposites. Words like dog, which can mean any canine, or specifically a male canine. Because the traits overlap, they can mask the zeugma effect. While imperfect and subject to contextual interference, formal diagnostics like conjunction reduction are necessary. They are the only safeguard we have against substituting lazy linguistic intuition for rigorous structural proof. The stakes of identifying ambiguity are highest in formal logic and mathematics. These systems rely entirely on univocality. Univocality is the absolute requirement that terms mean exactly one thing throughout an argument. We can observe the catastrophic effect of ambiguity using a classic syllogism designed to test formal validity. Premise 1. Babe Ruth owned a bat. Premise 2. Bats have wings. Conclusion. Babe Ruth owned something with wings. By its structural form, it appears valid, but upon lexical inspection, it fails. The middle term splits into distinct subscripts, breaking the transitive logic. Variable 1, bat sub 1, corresponds to the wooden baseball equipment. Variable 2, bat sub 2, corresponds to the flying mammal. When variables in our deductions harbor hidden lexical shifts, the argument commits the fallacy of equivocation. The formal logical structure is rendered entirely useless. Because ambiguity breaks logical structures, it is highly tempting for academics and philosophers to invent an ambiguity to solve a complex problem in a thesis. Philosopher Saul Kripke called this the lazy man's approach. It is the tendency for theorists to claim a key term is being used in a special sense, simply to dodge an uncomfortable counterexample. Positing an ambiguity as an intellectual escape hatch is a methodological failure, unless that ambiguity is backed by absolute structural necessity or formal diagnostic testing. The ultimate governing law for semantic analysis is Paul Grice's methodological razor. Senses are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. Natural language is a highly productive, flexible system. It constantly bends, relying heavily on sense generality and context sensitivity to efficiently transmit ideas. Delineating exactly where language merely bends to accommodate context versus where it formally breaks into multiple discrete realities is the absolute bedrock of robust semantic architecture.